Before we begin, wear your headphones for the best experience and don't forget to like and subscribe. 20 minutes. That's all the time it took for three men to walk into the Flamingo Hotel in Las Vegas and announce they were in charge. 20 minutes after Bugsy Siegel's head was blown apart by a hail of bullets in Beverly Hills, David Berman and his partners strolled through those casino doors like they owned the place, because suddenly they did. This wasn't chaos. This was precision. This was a man who had spent his entire life preparing for that exact moment, a kid from a failed North Dakota farm who would help invent modern Las Vegas. On June 20th, 1947, a small backroom in the El Cortez Hotel was thick with smoke and tension. Three men sat around a mahogany table, each tied to a different part of America's underground. Outside, Las Vegas baked in the heat. Inside, the room felt cold. David Berman sat at the head. He was Bugsy Siegel's partner at the Flamingo, but Bugsy wasn't there. He was in Beverly Hills, relaxing on a couch in his girlfriend Virginia Hill's home, reading the evening paper, unaware he had only minutes left to live. To understand how Berman ended up shaping one of the biggest shifts in organized crime, you have to start far from Las Vegas, on the frozen plains of North Dakota, where a Jewish boy from Odessa learned early that in America, survival meant fighting for your place. Berman was born into an Orthodox Jewish family in Odessa, Russian Empire. His father was a former rabbinical student who played the violin. The family had fled the pogroms, seeking the American dream, but what they found instead was a harsh plot of farmland in Ashley, North Dakota. This is it. This is what we left Odessa for. It looks like Siberia. On deck, 1907, the Bermans took possession of their 160 acres 6 miles northwest of Ashley. Young David, or Davy as he would come to be known, learned early that survival meant adaptation. Davy excelled in school, but was frequently in trouble because of fights. Every time a boy called him a kike, a derogatory term for Jew, he beat him up. After their house burned down and the farm failed, the family moved to Sioux City, Iowa, where David's transformation from rabbinical grandson to street fighter accelerated. Davy got a job as a newsboy and, to increase his earnings, slept in the print shop of the Sioux City Journal so that he could get an early start hawking newspapers. He organized the Jewish boys selling papers so they could keep other boys from selling papers in their territory. By 13, he wasn't just selling newspapers anymore. At the age of 13, he ran a crew of teenage thugs committing petty shakedowns and eventually a string of illegal distilleries. He then went on to run his own bank-robbing crew. The teenage Berman had discovered something fundamental about America. The rules were different here, but power was still power, whether it came from a badge or a gun. And in the Prohibition era, the men with guns often had more power than the men with badges. His criminal enterprises caught the attention of the Genovese crime family in New York, one of the 5 families that would come to dominate organized crime in America. After developing close ties to the Genovese crime family, he moved to Minneapolis, where he operated major bookmaking operations. Minneapolis in the 1930s and early 1940s was Berman's kingdom. He ran gambling operations from the Radisson Hotel, then the Dickman Luxury Hotel, controlling the city's underworld with an iron fist wrapped in a velvet glove. But David Berman wasn't just another Jewish gangster climbing the ladder of organized crime. He had something that set him apart from the Meyer Lanskys and Bugsy Siegels of the world, a burning hatred for fascism that went beyond business, beyond territory, beyond money. In 1936, Minneapolis had become what one journalist called the capital of anti-Semitism in the United States. The Silver Shirts, an American Nazi organization funded partly by Nazi Germany, held rallies throughout the city. In 1936, Berman and his crew had violently disrupted meetings of the Silver Shirts, an American fascist and pro-Nazi organization, at a Minneapolis Elks Club and elsewhere. The scene at the Elks Club that night would become legendary in the Minneapolis underworld. Berman contacted his fighting crew and told them to meet at the Radisson at 7:00 p.m. Once they had assembled, Davy distributed the tools of his trade, knucks, bats, sawed-off pool cues. When the Nazi leader called for all the Jew bastards in the city to be expelled, or worse, Berman and his associates burst into the room and started cracking heads. After 10 minutes they had emptied the hall. His suit covered in blood, Berman took the microphone and announced, "This is a warning. Anybody who says anything against Jews gets the same treatment. Only next time it will be worse." After Berman broke up 2 more rallies, there were no more public Silver Shirt meetings in Minneapolis. This wasn't about territory or profit. This was about something deeper, something that connected Berman to his grandfather, the rabbinical student, to the pogroms his family had fled, to every Jewish child who'd been called a name in a schoolyard. Susan Berman later learned that the Nuremberg laws and the Holocaust enraged her father so intensely that he enlisted in the Canadian Army. Think about that for a moment. Here was a man who controlled Minneapolis's gambling operations, who had the police in his pocket, who commanded respect and fear in equal measure, and he gave it all up to fight Nazis. Berman had in fact previously been turned away by the United States military for being a convicted felon. In addition, the attack on Pearl Harbor had not yet brought the United States into World War II. So he traveled to Canada, enlisted under an assumed identity, and fought with the 12th Manitoba Dragoons in the European theater. Berman and his Minnesota friend Nathan Gittelwich both fought in the European theater as soldiers with the 18th Armored Car Regiment, 12th Manitoba Dragoons, II Canadian Corps, which first experienced combat during the Normandy landings. He was wounded in combat, briefly presumed dead, and when he returned to Minneapolis in 1945, he found his empire in ruins. After the war, he returned to Minneapolis, where his gambling operations were shattered during the first term of racket-busting Mayor Hubert Humphrey. The reformist mayor had used Berman's absence to dismantle his operations, but Berman had already set his sights on a new frontier, Las Vegas. In 1940, he had made a trip to Las Vegas and saw that it held great potential for gambling. In 1945, Berman purchased 3 downtown clubs, the El Cortez, the Las Vegas Club, and the El Dorado, later called the Horseshoe. He wasn't alone in this vision. His partner in the Flamingo Hotel project was Benjamin Bugsy Siegel, a flashy, violent man who'd come west from New York with big dreams and mob money. But Bugsy had problems, big problems. The Flamingo, which was supposed to cost $1 million, had ballooned to $6 million. The Flamingo wasn't immediately profitable, and Siegel ended up in an argument with Lucky Luciano over paying back the money used to build it. Around the same time that Siegel was killed in Beverly Hills, Luciano's men walked into the Flamingo and announced that they were now in charge. Which brings us back to that afternoon meeting on June 20th, 1947. In the room with Berman were Moe Sedway and Gus Greenbaum, fellow associates in the Genovese crime family. They weren't discussing whether Bugsy would die. That decision had already been made at higher levels, probably in Havana, possibly by Mayor Lansky himself. They were discussing what would happen after. The timing had to be perfect. Too soon and they'd look like conspirators. Too late and someone else might grab control. 20 minutes after the 1947 assassination of Bugsy Siegel in Beverly Hills, California, Gus Greenbaum, Moe Sedway, and David Berman walked into the lobby of the Flamingo and announced that they were in charge. 20 minutes, that's all it took to rewrite the power structure of Las Vegas. On the night of June 20, 1947, Siegel sat on a sofa reading a copy of the Los Angeles Times, together with his associate Alan Smiley, in the living room of 810 North Linden Drive, the Beverly Hills mansion that he had leased for his girlfriend Virginia Hill. A little before 11:00 p.m., an unknown assailant fired into the living room through a window with a .30 caliber M1 carbine at a range of just 14 feet from an archway in the driveway of the house, resting his weapon on a trellis just outside the window. The assassination was professional, efficient, and sent a message that echoed through every casino, every backroom, every darkened alley where mob business was conducted. The old ways were dead. Bugsy's flashy, attention-grabbing style was out. The new Las Vegas would be run like a business, with David Berman as one of its chief executives. For the next decade, Berman would help transform Las Vegas from a dusty desert town into the gambling capital of America. Davey ran the Las Vegas gambling enterprises for the mob from 1947 until his death in 1957. He operated with a different philosophy than Bugsy. Where Siegel had been ostentatious, Berman was discreet. Where Bugsy had skimmed and spent recklessly, Berman kept meticulous books and made sure everyone got their proper share. The Flamingo, which had hemorrhaged money under Siegel, became profitable within months under the new management. Berman later moved his interests to the Riviera Hotel, continuing to build the Las Vegas Strip into what would become America's adult playground. During their tenure as Las Vegas mob royalty, Gladys Berman regularly hosted seders for thousands at the Riviera Hotel on the Las Vegas Strip. Think about that image. A Jewish mobster's wife hosting Passover seders for thousands in a Las Vegas casino. It was a peculiar form of respectability, a way of saying that even in this city of sin, even among these men who lived outside the law, there were traditions that mattered, connections to something older and deeper than the neon and the numbers. But Las Vegas extracted its price from everyone, and the Berman family would pay dearly. Berman died on the operating table during surgery to remove polyps from his colon on Father's Day, 1957. Father's Day, there's a cruel irony in that timing. A man who'd survived street fights in Sioux City, gang wars in Minneapolis, and Nazi bullets in Europe died during what should have been routine surgery. His daughter, journalist Susan Berman, always maintained that her father died under mysterious circumstances, but all indications were that he died of a heart attack during surgery. Whether it was really just a heart attack or something more sinister, we'll never know. In that world, even natural deaths carried question marks. The tragedy didn't end with David's death. Gladys Berman died shortly after the death of her husband due to an overdose of barbiturates. It remains unclear, however, whether Gladys Berman's death was a suicide or a mob hit motivated by her refusal to hand over her husband's control of multiple Las Vegas casinos. At the time of her death, Gladys Ewald Berman was only 39 years old. Their daughter Susan inherited a fortune. The couple's only child was journalist Susan Berman, who was gradually paid a total of $4.3 million by the American Mafia in return for her inherited stake in Las Vegas casinos and other properties, but also inherited the shadows that came with it. She would grow up to become a journalist, writing about her father, trying to understand the man who could break Nazi heads with baseball bats but also host elaborate satyrs, who could orchestrate the takeover of a casino empire but couldn't protect his own family from its consequences. Susan Berman was murdered execution style with a 9mm handgun inside her rented home in the Los Angeles suburb of Benedict Canyon on December 23, 2000. The murder has been linked to Robert Durst, the troubled real estate heir who was allegedly afraid Susan would reveal information about the disappearance of his wife. Even in death, the Berman family couldn't escape the violence that had both built and destroyed their American dream. That meeting on June 20, 1947, wasn't just about taking over the Flamingo. It was about the transformation of organized crime in America, from the wild, bloody days of Prohibition to the corporate-style operations that would dominate Las Vegas for decades. David Berman stood at the pivot point of that transformation, a man who understood that in America, power wasn't just about muscle, it was about knowing when to use it and when to put it away. But there's another layer to this story, one that takes us back to those nights in Minneapolis when Berman and his crew were cracking Nazi skulls. You see, the men who walked into the Flamingo that night weren't just seizing a casino. They were Jewish gangsters taking control of what would become one of America's most iconic cities, at a time when Jews were still barred from country clubs, from certain neighborhoods, from positions of real power in legitimate society. He was just my father to me, but to the world he was Davy Berman, one of the founders of the syndicate, a trusted partner and confidant of Mayor Lansky, Frank Costello, and Bugsy Siegel. Susan Berman wrote those words trying to reconcile the father she knew with the historical figure he'd become. But maybe there's no reconciliation needed. Maybe David Berman was exactly what he appeared to be, a product of his time and circumstances, a man who used violence to protect his people when the law wouldn't, who built an empire in the desert because the established orders wouldn't let him build one anywhere else. The meeting that rewired the underworld wasn't really about crime or casinos or even money. It was about transformation, of a city, of an industry, of the very notion of what organized crime could be in America. Las Vegas became a place where everything was permitted except disorder, where vice was regulated and taxed and turned into entertainment. It was David Berman's vision as much as anyone's, a place where a rabbi's grandson could become royalty, where Jewish holidays were celebrated in casinos, where the American dream could be won on a roll of the dice. But here's what haunts me about this story. David Berman fought actual Nazis. He enlisted in a foreign army, risked his life in combat, saw the consequences of letting hatred go unchallenged. And when he came home, he built an empire in a city that wouldn't exist without men like him. Men who operated outside the law because the law hadn't made room for them inside it. There's a photograph of the Flamingo from the 1950s, all neon and promise against the desert sky. If you know where to look, you can almost see the ghosts, Bugsy Siegel, shot dead on a Beverly Hills couch. David Berman dying on an operating table on Father's Day. Gladys Berman, 39 years old and gone too soon. Susan Berman trying to make sense of it all until someone put a bullet in her head in the year 2000. They're all gone now, the men who walked into the Flamingo that night in 1947. The casinos they built have been torn down and rebuilt, torn down and rebuilt again, each iteration bigger and more corporate than the last. The mob's control of Las Vegas ended decades ago, replaced by corporations and stockholders and regulatory commissions. But something of that original vision remains, not the violence or the crime, but the idea that Las Vegas could be a place where anyone could reinvent themselves, where your past didn't matter as much as your ability to pay your debts and keep your word. That was David Berman's gift to America, a city where the grandson of a rabbi could become a king, even if his kingdom was built on sand and neon and the turning of cards. The real tragedy of David Berman's life isn't that he was a gangster. It's that a man of his intelligence, his organizational ability, his genuine courage. Remember, this was someone who voluntarily fought Nazis twice, once in Minneapolis and once in Europe, had to become a gangster to achieve the American dream. In another time, another place, with another name or another faith, he might have been a CEO, a general, a senator. Instead, he became what America allowed him to become. A very successful criminal who helped build a city that would eventually no longer need him. His close social friends included Howard Hughes, Jack Benny, and Jimmy Durante. Think about that for a moment. This son of a failed North Dakota farmer, this teenage gang leader from Sioux City, this Nazi fighter turned casino boss, counted among his friends some of the most famous and powerful men in America. They came to his parties, they laughed at his jokes, they mourned at his funeral. After Berman died, it was said that he had the largest funeral Las Vegas had ever seen. The largest funeral Las Vegas had ever seen. For a Jewish gangster who started with nothing and ended with everything except the one thing he might have wanted most, legitimacy, real legitimacy, the kind that doesn't come with question marks and whispered stories and daughters who die with bullets in their heads. But here's the thing about legitimacy. It's often just violence that's had time to age, like whiskey in a barrel, until people forget its origins. The robber barons of the Gilded Age became philanthropists. The bootleggers' children became senators. And Las Vegas, that monument to vice that David Berman helped build, became America's playground, a legitimate destination where millions of ordinary people go to pretend, for just a weekend, that they're high rollers, that they're dangerous, that they're the kind of people who might walk into a casino and announce they're taking over. They don't know they're playing in a house that David Berman built, on foundations laid during a secret meeting while Bugsy Siegel was dying on a couch in Beverly Hills. They don't know about the Nazi skulls cracked in Minneapolis, about the wounded soldier presumed dead in Europe, about the father who died on Father's Day and the mother who followed too soon after. They don't know about Susan Berman trying to write her way to understanding, only to end up another casualty of a war that started before she was born. But maybe that's the point. Maybe the greatest trick David Berman ever pulled was making Las Vegas seem inevitable, like it had always been there, shining in the desert, waiting for America to find it. The meeting that rewired the underworld didn't just change organized crime, it created a new kind of American dream, one where anyone could be a winner, at least for a night, at least until the house edge caught up with them. And the house always wins. David Berman knew that better than anyone. He built the house. He set the odds. He made sure that even in a city dedicated to chance, nothing was really left to chance. The meeting on June 20th, 1947 wasn't a gamble. It was a carefully orchestrated transfer of power, timed down to the minute, executed with the precision of a military operation. 20 minutes after Bugsy died, they walked through those doors. 20 minutes to change the course of American crime, American entertainment, American culture itself. 20 minutes to transform a failed gambling hall into the foundation of an empire that would outlive them all. That's the real secret of that meeting. It wasn't about what they destroyed, but what they built. Not Bugsy's corpse cooling on a couch, but the city that would rise from the desert, neon bright and forever promising that this time, this roll, this hand, you might beat the odds. Even though the odds were set by men like David Berman, who knew that the house always wins because they built the house, they owned the house, they were the house. And in the end, the house took everything from them too. David dead at 54. Gladys dead at 39. Susan dead at 55, shot in the head like her father's old partner, like it was 1947 all over again, and some debts can never really be paid, only passed down from generation to generation until there's no one left to collect or to owe. But Las Vegas remains, that glittering monument to ambition and avarice, to dreams and nightmares, to the peculiarly American notion that anyone can make it if they're willing to pay the price. David Berman paid that price in full, in blood, in family, in whatever piece of his soul he left on those Minneapolis streets when he was beating Nazis with baseball bats, defending his people the only way he knew how. The meeting that rewired the underworld was really a funeral and a birth at the same time, the death of the old way of doing things, violent and personal and doomed, and the birth of something new, corporate and efficient and infinitely more powerful. David Berman stood at that crossroads, 1 foot in each world, understanding both but belonging fully to neither. Perhaps that's his true legacy, not the casinos or the money or even the violence, but the transformation itself, the proof that in America, anyone can become anything, even if that anything is a gangster who fights Nazis, builds cities, and dies wondering what might have been if the world had been different, if the choices had been different, if a rabbi's grandson from Odessa could have found another way to become an American success story. The last time Susan Berman saw Las Vegas, the city her father helped build, she was researching her memoir, trying to understand the man who'd given her everything and left her with questions that would ultimately cost her life. She walked through casinos that bore no trace of David Berman's name but carried his fingerprints in their very DNA, the careful balance of glamour and danger, the promise of transformation, the house edge that ensures the dream is always just out of reach. That's what that secret meeting gave America, not just a new Las Vegas, but a new kind of dream, one where the lines between legitimate and illegitimate, between success and crime, between dreams and nightmares, became so blurred that we stopped trying to distinguish between them. We just accepted that this is how things are, how they've always been, how they'll always be, but they haven't always been this way. There was a moment, a specific moment, June 20th, 1947, sometime between when the bullets entered Bugsy Siegel's skull and when David Berman walked through the Flamingo's doors, when everything changed. When organized crime stopped being about ethnic neighborhoods and prohibition and became about something else entirely, something that looked so much like legitimate business that eventually it became legitimate business. David Berman didn't live to see that final transformation. He died in 1957 when Las Vegas was still mob run, when the Rat Pack was king, when the city still had some of that old danger, that sense that anything could happen. He died before the corporations took over, before the family-friendly marketing campaigns, before Las Vegas became just another American destination, sanitized and safe and utterly predictable. Maybe that's a mercy. Maybe David Berman, who'd fought with his fists in schoolyards and with guns in Europe, who'd built an empire with his bare hands and lost everything that mattered along the way, couldn't have survived in a Las Vegas run by MBAs and marketing departments. He was a man of his time, and his time ended on an operating table on Father's Day, 1957, with his daughter about to inherit a fortune and a curse in equal measure. The meeting that rewired the underworld, it sounds like something out of a movie, and in a way, it has become one, told and retold in countless films and books and documentaries, each one getting the facts a little wrong, the timing a little off, the motivations a little simplified. But the truth is both simpler and more complex than any movie could capture. It was just business, but it was also personal. It was about money, but it was also about respect. It was about power, but it was also about survival. David Berman survived longer than most in his business. He survived the streets of Sioux City, the gang wars of Minneapolis, the battlefields of Europe, and the treacherous politics of Las Vegas. But nobody survives forever, not in that life, not in any life. The meeting that rewired the underworld also started a clock ticking, counting down to the moment when the men who'd seized power that night would lose it in turn, when their empires would crumble, when their children would inherit their wealth but not their worlds. Today, if you walk through Las Vegas, you won't find any monuments to David Berman. There's no plaque marking where he stood when he announced the takeover of the Flamingo, no statue commemorating the Jewish gangster who helped build the city. But he's there anyway, in the very structure of the place, in the way the casinos operate, in the careful balance between chaos and control that defines Las Vegas to this day. That's the final irony of that secret meeting. It wasn't really secret, and it wasn't really a meeting. It was a public declaration, an announcement to the world that the old order was dead and a new one had been born. And David Berman, the rabbi's grandson, the Nazi fighter, the gangster philosopher, was its midwife and its prophet, even if he didn't live to see the promised land he'd helped create. The promised land turned out to be made of neon and concrete, of impossible promises and inevitable disappointments, of dreams that could come true but usually didn't. It was a very American promised land, built by men who weren't quite American enough for the real America, who had to build their own America in the desert, where the normal rules didn't apply, where a Jewish gangster could be royalty, at least until the next meeting, the next takeover, the next transformation. And there's always a next transformation. That's what David Berman understood, what made him different from Bugsy Siegel, who thought he could make Las Vegas in his own image and keep it that way forever. Berman knew that nothing lasts forever, especially in the desert, especially in America, especially for men like him. The meeting that rewired the underworld was just one moment in an endless series of moments, each one rewriting the rules, each one declaring that the old way is dead and the new way has begun. But some things don't change. The house still always wins. The dreams are still just out of reach. And somewhere in some backroom in some city, someone is having a meeting that will rewire something. Maybe not the underworld, maybe something else entirely, but the principle remains the same. Power shifts, empires rise and fall, and the children inherit fortunes and curses they didn't ask for and can't escape. Susan Berman tried to escape. She became a journalist, a writer, someone who told stories instead of living them. But the story found her anyway, in a Benedict Canyon house in the year 2000, in the form of a bullet that connected her to her father's world more finally than any memoir ever could. Susan Berman had been friends with Durst's wife and had agreed to talk to police about the disappearance shortly before she was murdered. That's the real horror of that secret meeting, not what it did to the men who were there, but what it did to everyone who came after, the wives and children and grandchildren who inherited not just money but shadows, not just wealth but danger, not just legacies but curses that followed them no matter how far they ran or how different they tried to be. David Berman's legacy isn't just Las Vegas. It's every child of the underworld who grows up wondering whether their fortune is blood money, whether their father's love came with a price tag attached, whether they'll ever be free of the choices someone else made in a smoke-filled room while someone else was dying on a couch in Beverly Hills. The meeting that rewired the underworld is still happening, in a way. Every time someone walks into a Las Vegas casino, they're walking into David Berman's dream. Every time someone puts money on the table, hoping against hope that this time will be different, they're participating in a ritual that began when three men decided that 20 minutes was long enough to wait before seizing an empire. And every time the house wins, which is almost every time, David Berman wins too, even though he's been dead for more than 60 years, even though his daughter is dead, even though everyone who was in that room is dead, even though the flamingo they took over has been demolished and rebuilt so many times that not a single brick remains from the original structure. That's immortality of a sort, I suppose. Not the kind a rabbi would hope for his grandson, not the kind any father would want for his child, but immortality nonetheless. David Berman built something that outlasted him, something that will probably outlast all of us, something that captures an essential truth about America, that we're all gamblers at heart, all hoping for that one big score, all willing to believe that the odds don't apply to us, that we're different, that we're special, that we can beat the house. We can't beat the house, David Berman made sure of that, but we keep trying anyway because that's what Americans do. We believe in impossible dreams and fresh starts and the idea that anyone can make it if they're willing to work hard enough, fight hard enough, sacrifice enough. David Berman worked harder, fought harder, sacrificed more than most, and he made it in his way. He transformed himself from a refugee child on a frozen farm to a king of Las Vegas. He fought Nazis with his fists and built casinos with his cunning. He made fortunes and lost families. He won everything that could be won and lost everything that actually mattered. The meeting that rewired the underworld was his greatest triumph and his ultimate tragedy, the moment when he seized control of an empire that would destroy everyone he loved, including, eventually, himself. But what an empire it was, bright as neon, vast as the desert, as American as the dream that brought his family to that frozen farm in the first place. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's all any of us can hope for, to build something that lasts, even if it destroys us in the building, even if it takes everything we have and everyone we love. Maybe that's the real American dream, not success but sacrifice, not winning but playing, not beating the house but building it, owning it, becoming it, until there's no difference between the gambler and the game, between the dreamer and the dream, between the man and the myth he leaves behind. David Berman left behind a myth and a city, a fortune and a curse, a daughter who would die trying to understand him, and a Las Vegas that no longer remembers his name. But every neon light that flickers in the desert darkness, every card that's dealt, every die that rolls, they all carry a piece of that meeting, that moment, that 20-minute gap between one world ending and another beginning. The meeting that rewired the underworld ended a long time ago, But in Las Vegas, in the casino lights, in the promises that can't quite be kept, and the dreams that can't quite come true, it's still happening. It will always be happening. That's David Berman's gift to us, or his curse. A city where the meeting never ends, where the transformation is always beginning, where anyone can walk through the door and announce that they're taking over, even though the house always wins, even though the price is always higher than anyone expects, even though every empire built in the desert eventually returns to sand. But for one moment, for 20 minutes on June 20th, 1947, David Berman owned the world. And in Las Vegas, in the city he helped build, that moment lasts forever, frozen in neon, preserved in the promise that this time, this bet, this roll of the dice, everything will be different. It won't be different, it never is, but we believe it anyway. That's the real genius of what David Berman built, not a casino or a city, but a belief, a faith as powerful as anything his rabbi grandfather might have preached, that in America, in Las Vegas, in the space between one moment and the next, anything is possible, even the impossible, even the transformation of a refugee child into a king. Even if the kingdom is built on sand and blood and secrets that die with the people who kept them. The meeting that rewired the underworld was never really about the underworld. It was about America, about what we're willing to do to succeed, what we're willing to sacrifice for our dreams, what we're willing to become when the traditional paths to power are closed to us. David Berman became what America allowed him to become, what America forced him to become. A gangster, a killer, a builder of impossible dreams in an impossible city in an impossible country where anything is possible, except escape from the choices we make in smoke-filled rooms while someone somewhere is dying. Bugsy Siegel died at 10:45 p.m. on June 20th, 1947. 20 minutes later, David Berman walked through the doors of the Flamingo Hotel and changed American history. That's all it took, 20 minutes and the will to seize a moment that would never come again. The moment is still there, waiting, in every Las Vegas casino, in every bet placed, in every dream of beating the odds. David Berman put it there, and it will be there long after the last person who remembers his name is gone, long after the last casino is torn down and rebuilt, long after Las Vegas itself returns to the desert it came from. That's immortality, that's legacy. That's the meeting that rewired the underworld and rewired America itself, teaching us that everything has a price, especially our dreams, especially our transformations, especially the 20 minutes that change everything and the lifetime we spend paying for them.